Washington Journal continues.
Terrell Starr joins us now from New York. He's a national political correspondent at Fusion Media. And Mr. Starr, first, what is Fusion Media and who's the audience that you see yourself writing for as you cover campaign 2016?
Okay, absolutely. Well, Fusion, where I'm a national political correspondent, we aim to target millennials, those people who are 18, 35 generally, but younger people who are really looking for news that really addresses the issues that we care about. That goes to immigration, that goes to social justice. More importantly, we tend not to cover news from a traditional news or media standpoint. We tend to have a voice. We tend to write for an audience that's very open to LGBTQ people. So we address those issues more intensely. So if that means me going out to California to interview a 25-year-old porn star over a condom referendum that's taking place in that state, or if that means me talking to a 25-year-old person who lost their rights in Virginia because of restorative voting rights issues, those are the type of people who we address. It's the people who you think are not important in the political process because they're not voting as often as their parents, but they're the people who are equally important because they're our future and the views that they come with, the mindset that they have right now are going to be those people who will be voting and will be a powerful bloc in the future. You
said you tend to have a voice in your writing. Does that mean you tend to have an opinion in the stories that you write on campaign 2016?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and that's an interesting thing, right? Because when we talk about opinion, we talk about objectivity, right? So this idea that if you voice your opinion, then that means that you're not separating yourself from a story. And I don't think that's really possible right now, because anytime a human being goes out and they report a story, say I have about an 800-word count for a report that I'm working on. I talk to 5 people. I make the choice of which quotes go in, which quotes don't make it. And so I think what's really important is that the experience that I bring is experience, and I think it's a level of expertise. One of the things that makes me really passionate about the work that I do, for example, particularly with criminal justice, is that I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and I grew up in a home where both my uncles sold drugs. I actually was handed a gun when I was 12 years old, and I know what the negative impacts would have been for me had I gone down the route of joining a gang. I know what took me out of those situations. And so when I voice my opinion, I'm just not saying something because I want my voice to be heard. I'm interjecting my life experiences as expertise because I feel it's important and it will advance the quality of the stories that I produce.
Well, let's talk about your voice and what you make of Donald Trump and his speech yesterday. The Washington Times with the headline, "Trump reaching out to blacks with law and order" speech, saying that he put forward an agenda to restore law and order and revitalize inner city neighborhoods that he said suffer from years of misguided Democratic politics. I want to show our viewers a short clip from his comments last night.
We reject the bigotry of Hillary Clinton, which panders to and talks down to communities of color and sees them only as votes. That's all they care about, not as individual human beings worthy of a better future. They have taken advantage. She doesn't care at all about the hurting people of this country or the suffering she has caused them, and she, meaning she and her party officials. There has been tremendous suffering because of what they have brought. The African American community has been taken for granted for decades by the Democratic Party, and look how they're doing. It's time to break with the failures of the past. I want to offer Americans a new and much better future. It's time for rule by the people, not rule for the special interests which we have right now.
And that speech taking place in Milwaukee, of course, which has been rocked by violence in recent days. Terrell Starr, your thoughts on that speech?
Well, absolutely. So let's kind of go into some aspects of what he said that you can kind of relate to and understand, right? So think about Chicago, think about Baltimore, think about Los Angeles, think about a large number of major metropolitan cities that are run by Democrats. A lot of these cities definitely do have issues with police violence. For example, I know he wasn't talking about that specifically, but I want to add it in because I think it's very important. There are a lot of areas where black people are in the majority as far as a voting bloc, and Democrats have been in power and have failed them. The real challenge and the real problem with that is that Donald Trump does not talk about institutional racism. He doesn't talk about white supremacy. And so he makes it a political issue that is germane to the Democratic Party, when in fact, if you take my hometown of Detroit, Michigan, for example, there's an area of that city called the Black Bottom where people like my grandmother, for example, who migrated up into the major cities like Chicago, or take, for example, my hometown, Detroit, there were specific areas in that city where black people were pretty much told that they had to live, right? So when you think about economic inequality, when you think about underserved communities, this was issues of public policy that were passed down from one administration to the next, regardless of party. And so when Donald Trump talks about reaching out to black voters, he really has to discuss that. And I think most importantly, he's polling so poorly with them because many people feel that he's xenophobic and quite frankly racist. And I think that is consistent with the reporting that we've been doing at Fusion. Another challenge with Donald Trump is that it's actually very difficult to have conversations with him about race because you can't talk to his representatives. I've actually tried to reach out to Omarosa, his director of African American outreach. She has not made herself available to any of my interview requests. I tried to speak to some of his leadership on his African American Council, his favorite black pastor hasn't made himself available. So answering hard questions and really specifying policy issues that will affect black people is something that's very difficult to get out of them in the campaign, simply because I don't think they have the answers. Are you credentialed by the Trump campaign and the Clinton campaign? Credentialed? What do you mean by credentialed exactly? Like, as far, I do go to the rallies, but as far as the only thing I really do is we reach out for comment anytime we write stories, but as far as credentialed, I can't say no. In terms of Fusion Media overall, what is its relationship with Univision? I'll repeat that, I can't hear you. What's Fusion's relationship with Univision? Oh, okay, well basically we were bought by Univision from ABC News, and so I think right now, I don't really deal too much with the business side of it, but what I do know is that right now we have a great opportunity to really reach out to the audience that's designed for us in the first place, which is young minorities, and we're able to use the voice that we have on our own. And I think that it ties specifically into Univision because we are, we're expanding beyond Latino voters, beyond Latino viewers and listeners, and we're expanding to, African Americans, people who are other minority groups, and so working under Univision, I feel like it really gives us that leeway and that rope to really tack on to the audience that's really designed for us. We're talking about Fusion and about Terrell Starr's work as a national political correspondent. Their phone numbers, as usual for this segment: Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, Independents 202-748-8002. We're going to start on our line for Democrats. Brian is in Colorado Springs this morning. Brian, you're on with Terrell Starr.
Good morning, Terrell and C-SPAN. Thank you, C-SPAN, for all that you do. I have a statement concerning the free student tuition. I'd just like to hear a response, and after I'm done talking, I'll get off. But, I'm kind of fiscally conservative, and what concerns me about the tuition, other than the obvious of how it's going to be paid for right off the bat, is what's going to happen in the future. If you look at the labor reports, we're obviously transitioning from more into a technical-driven economy. And what I think is going to happen here is the millennials are going to be taking those tech-driven jobs, and your free tuition isn't going to be actually free, because I think the taxes that are going to be increased on your guys' wages are going to be taken out in taxes. And my point on that is if you pay off your tuition, it's paid for and done with. If they tax your tuition for them paying for it originally, taxes are forever. And that will be money out of your pocket forever until you retire.
Brian, got your point. Terrell Starr on the issue of college tuition in this campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think even before we talk about this campaign, we have to talk about some of the initiatives that were carried out by President Barack Obama. One of the things that he did a really good job of was investing in community college education, right? So I was a part of a after-school learning program, the Reggie McKenzie Foundation, and the founder of it, his name is Reggie McKenzie. He said something to us as students I found really interesting. He said that not everyone is going to go to college. And so I think that we can kind of modify that to say that everybody may not want to get a 4-year degree. But if you can go to a community college where you can get a particular skill, particularly with green technology, which is something that the president has been very aggressively pursuing, then that will provide opportunities, particularly for people of color, minority communities. So, urban cities like Chicago, Detroit, New York, Philadelphia. He has been progressive about that even when he became president back in 2008. Right now, you have Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders during the Democratic primaries, for example. They had slightly different goals, right? So Hillary Clinton she didn't come out all the way for a universal, just flat out free education. She had a modified version where education would be covered to a certain extent for public schools. And so as far as the tax issue, I think that people are still trying to figure out exactly how that would work for us, right? So, a lot of young people are going into debt for large reasons because college education, even at public institutions, are increasing, right? And so a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have competition coming in from overseas people who can just outright pay. And I think that education is something in this country that we as as a nation, as an electorate, even a political standpoint, we really don't invest in a lot. So think about the money that's devoted to public education and at the state level, at the local level. So I think that right now, as far as to answer that question, people are definitely trying to figure out what's the best way to pay for it. And so Hillary Clinton's proposal seems like it'll be one that could possibly go a step further than Bernie Sanders because it seems more doable, but we'll see. It's not something that's etched in stone yet.
Shirley's waiting for you in Tallahassee, Florida, a Democrat. Shirley, good morning.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. I really have been appreciating a lot of the wonderful book TVs and just wonderful series that we have with our wonderful C-SPAN.
Appreciate that, Shirley. Go ahead. What's your question?
This in light of where we are with the 2016 campaign, and being that history and geography and class has an imprint. We now are living in, I think, a country where our millennials and our minorities have almost converged into the intersection of a really diversified country. And I think that because of geography and the history of how land ownership and opportunity is bridged because of living in neighborhoods with better amenities, better infrastructure, better schools, and therefore better opportunities. When I listen to the issues that are confronting our millennials and minorities, and as I share, I see these two words as in an intersecting way, because I think our millennials are living in one of the most diversified times in our history as it relates to class and mobile opportunity and the history that has, in fact, created this class division that I felt happened with the viewing of the Donald Trump speech last night in Wisconsin to an all-white audience. It was almost like reminding me of when Ronald Reagan went to Philadelphia, Mississippi, to speak about a division that somehow saying now the headlines that black people are being reached out to, it's actually an insult because minorities and millennials, the intersecting group in the society right now who live, I'm 60. I teach at HBCU. My husband and I both.
I went to a black school myself, so.
Yes, so you understand what I'm speaking of.
Well,
And
Shirley,
HBCU
let's let Terrell Starr jump in. He's been nodding his head here to some of your comments.
Absolutely. So here's the thing about this campaign, right, with Donald Trump. We have to accept the fact that Donald Trump represents a significant portion of the American electorate. That's the reality. And people have been saying Donald Trump is not a reflection of the Republican Party. That's what the GOP leadership says. We're trying to point to different reasons behind why someone like him is able to say disparaging comments about Mexicans, about Muslims, about black people, about anyone who's not white, and why the more he talks, the more popular he becomes. And we can only point to the fact that there's an appetite for that. And until America does a moral check, a pulse check on itself, then more people like him will be able to rise. Donald Trump is someone who had the gall and the audacity, and I'll say he was keen enough to check the pulse of many people in America who do believe that Muslims, people who practice Islam, are a threat to their national security, people who are born and raised here, people who are of Mexican descent are those who are taking their jobs. There are people who genuinely believe that. And so I think that when we talk about why this person, why Mr. Trump is able to do so well, there's an important fact that we have to look at. One, I don't see Mr. Trump winning this campaign because there's simply not enough white people to vote for him. Considering that you have enough black people who come out to vote, if they continue to come out in large numbers like they did in 2008, 2012, most minorities, black people, Latino people, and we can't forget about Asians. We can't forget about people who are people who are of Arab descent. There are not enough people who are white and who are angry to vote for Mr. Trump, and so what we're going to see in this election is probably a dying breed of the white angry male vote. And that has been something that many Republican politicians have been able to use. I don't see this happening in 2020, definitely not 2024. Oh. And so this should definitely be a wake-up call for the Republican Party to really look at what type of values it holds and what kinds of people that it will choose to represent its party, because this is definitely a very troubling post check for the party. And I think that some people definitely are recognizing that, but they simply don't know what to do because this is the election and people voted for Trump. So. Well,
let's bring in some callers from our line for Republicans. Daryl has been waiting in Decatur, Georgia. Daryl, you're on with Terrell Starr. Daryl, you with us? Got to stick by your phone. Oh, sorry, Daryl. Answer your phone when you're there. Kat is in Los Angeles, California, Republican. Kat, good morning. You're on the Washington Journal.
Oh, good afternoon, or good morning. I almost said good afternoon. This is an interesting conversation, and we see the same issues being talked about by us in the black community. We have been voting Democrat for half a century. And look at our neighborhoods. Look at our families. Look at the lack of businesses in our community. And this diversification and multiculturalism is not, it's like we don't understand the game of politics. We have been lied to all of our lives. The game of politics is a competition between resources, between groups. It's a competition. It's an economic competition. We keep talking about social justice and civil rights, but the competition is an economic competition. And here you have Donald Trump reaching out to black people, and we continue to demonize him. I can understand, yes, that I can understand, yes, that he's not been appealing and that Omarosa and his group hasn't responded to you, I would suggest you not give up, because we have gotten nothing from the Democratic Party. And whoever
I'll keep my hopes up.
No, you should keep your hopes up. You should keep your hopes up. I'm in the media business, and I will continue to reach out to them. And we get in writing his promises that he made last night. You get it in writing.
Kat, what sort of work do you do in the media business?
Well, I'm in the radio business. I have a radio show, and I will continue to reach out to him because what is that notion that you continue to do the same thing over and over and over and over again for half a century, and you expect good results?
Okay, let's let Terrell Starr respond.
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate having conversations with Black Republicans, and I would be interested in understanding why his campaign hasn't reached out to her either. And I think, again, it goes back to the point of with Mr. Trump, many of his interactions with Black people are very staged, they're very coordinated. So if he goes to Black churches, he goes to a particular Black church where a lot of times it may not be open to the public. I think with Donald Trump, his efforts to appeal to Black voters are pretty much they're not going to really make much of a difference because he's caused so much damage at this point, right? And I want to tap on to another question about Democrats and why Black people overwhelmingly support this party, right? We have to recognize that with any voter, many people look at Democrats and Republicans as which evil am I going to negotiate with? And Black people vote for Democrats because that's the party with which people generally feel that they can negotiate. And my next question for anybody who wants to question Black people's devotion to the Democratic Party is, what policies have Republicans offered to Black people to make them switch? So if we go back to the 1950s, this is something that you could, I strongly advise Kat and anyone else to read the book called The Lonely Black Republican, and I hope I have the name right. And so basically in this book, it talks about how the Republican Party actually work to try to make inroads with Black voters. The problem is that there are no policies. But with Democrats, the switch came during the 1950s where they were very aggressive in introducing anti-lynching laws, anti-discrimination laws. Those were things that had teeth and showed Black people that the party was definitely interested in their issues. My question is, what policies, what economic initiatives are the Republicans pushing in order to show Black people that they care? I haven't seen any, and I would love to talk to Mr. Trump or Omarosa specifically about what those are besides ideological conversations. Another thing that Republicans do is they tend to say, well, let me go to the church community, let me go to people of faith, the conservative Black church. And there's this assumption that just because Black church leaders approve, they support Republicans in social issues like gay marriage or, women's right to choose, anti-abortion, then that means that they will create an inroads with those communities. But one thing that conservative Black people, Christian people think of more so than any of those things is the fact that they are Black. And so that reigns supreme over everything. And so you can't speak to my faith without speaking to my race. And I think that if Republicans continue to go into Black communities and talk about Christian values and conservative values without talking about disenfranchisement and voting, police brutality, then they're not going to make those inroads.
A lot of folks waiting to chat with you as we're having this conversation. John Smith writes in on Twitter, it's time for minorities and millennials to make a change. Democrats aren't doing anything for them, is John Smith's comment. Rhett is waiting to chat with you in McVeigh, Pennsylvania, an independent. Rhett, go ahead.
Hello, C-SPAN, and good morning, Terrell. I'm a truck driver.
Hey, good morning.
I was just up in your hometown yesterday, up in Detroit. I got got off I-75 onto Nichols Boulevard, and it's rough, brother. And I feel for where you grew up, in Detroit. Anyway, I have hope.
I loved it. I had a great time there. I have a lot of positive memories. So next time you come up there, I'll have to show you some of the good parts, and we'll do that. But go ahead, ask your question.
Okay, that's great. I was especially interested in the caller from Los Angeles who feels that the Democrats have not done anything, and why should we keep voting with Democrats? I think it's because it's the better of two bad choices. And I am a Bernie supporter.
Yeah.
And I would be interested to hear what her feelings towards Bernie would be, but that's something else. The main point I wanted to make is it seems that the United States, in many instances, education, health care, avoidance of war, policies like these, we do have other very developed countries in the world that don't seem to have the same struggle with these issues that are fundamental human issues, and why we don't adopt and be humble enough to copy some of these issues is beyond me.
Issues like what, though?
Excuse me?
Issues like what? Because I really understand where you're coming from in regards to some countries don't have the issues that we have. When we think about issues, it makes me think about the time I lived abroad for 4 years. There are certain countries in Europe that have, places like Norway that have superior education systems, places that have, high quality health care. But when I think about your question, it makes me think about, one, when I think the dynamic that changes all of that, and particularly for where I come from as working on social justice issues, thinking about race and gender, as soon as you put the element of race in that conversation, then it changes the dynamic. So, for example, in France, for example, there are a lot of black people who are immigrants there who talk about racial issues all the time. There are black people or people from North Africa who travel to Nordic countries that have excellent health care, excellent schooling systems, but discuss issues of racism. And so I think about Russia, all these other countries where I live. So the dynamic of race always plays a factor into that, because you're no longer in a lot of European countries, they're no longer homogenized societies. And so anytime you introduce new people into that society, it's going to cause a conflict. There's going to be a question of, are these people taking our jobs? Are these people trying to reinvent our culture? And so when I hear your question, it reminds me of, you are right. There are areas in the countries in the world where we can learn from, where we can benefit from. I think that in America, a country that is so ethnically diverse, a country that does have a history of racism and oppressing people, that is always going to be the element of conversation that we have to unpack. Because a lot of these services and a lot of these benefits that we prize in other countries, we have to look at whether or not their countries have a history of racism like we do, and whether or not whether or not these minorities or whether these oppressed communities have access to those same opportunities. So.
Well, Rhett mentioned that he's a Bernie Sanders supporter. Would point him to your story from last month on how Bernie Sanders lost the black vote. It's on Fusion if viewers want to read that story. Several other callers waiting to talk to you, though. Paul has been waiting in Eastlake, Ohio, a Republican. Paul, go ahead.
Hello. I've always been a Democrat my whole life. And the Democrats been in office, look, for how long? And what have they really done? Look, why is our country in such a bad shape? Why are people out of work? Ask these questions. The trouble with you people is you don't want to hear the truth. You want to listen to these stories that they're going to give you this, they're going to give you that, they're going to give you everything. And
when you say you people, what do you mean, by the way?
Pardon?
What do you mean by you people,
I said, when you
Paul?
say you people, what do you mean by you people? Yeah, I'm just trying to be clear.
Yeah, the Democrats are going to give everybody everything for nothing now. And that's why Donald Trump is just an ordinary man. He's not a politician. He spent his own money.
Terrell Starr.
Okay, well, I don't know what to make of that between you people and Donald Trump being an ordinary man, right? So I'll just simply say that I think there are a lot of frustrations among Democrats themselves, the people I've spoken to over the past few months about what the Democratic Party can do to improve on some of its policies, right? So if you think about the Black and brown communities that I engage, the number one thing that Black people I speak to want the Democratic Party to be more aggressive about is taking on police unions who they feel support abusive police officers, right? So when I think about Democrats and what they could do for Black and brown communities, you think about ways in which they can think of restorative justice issues. So I cover the Black Lives Matter movement extensively, and one of the major points in their platform focused on restorative justice. It focuses on the abolishment of laws that allow schools to suspend young people for quote unquote being disrespectful. So how are people of color allowed to be safe in their schools, in their communities? And I think that a lot of the people I talk to want Democrats to be more specific about how these things can happen and produce more policies that will address that. But as far as Donald Trump being an ordinary man, I don't think that anybody would say that Donald Trump is an ordinary man, somebody who's been a beneficiary of generational wealth and someone who is running for president of the United States. I don't think anyone, regardless of what race you are, who you are, could be ordinary and be in the position that he's in.
Let's go to our line for Democrats. Charles has been waiting, Jacksonville, Florida. Charles, you're on with Terrell Starr.
Yes, good morning. A couple of things that have been actually concerning me. I listen to people talking about what the president should do, but what about voting for either Congress or the Senate? These are where the power comes from. These people are the ones who will do the things you want done. But if you don't vote, as I've heard a lot of people say, I'm not going to vote for either party. Well, if you don't, then you're voting for nothing. Whoever you don't want in there will get in there. So I listened to the lady not too long ago who was a Republican. She's going on and on, but she doesn't seem to know that you have to vote for either the Senate, get the Senate and Congress in there, then you will get what you want. That's the only way.
On the importance of the congressional elections this year.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that I want to go a step further into what the gentleman's saying. And so one of the most important aspects of my reporting has focused on local elections. I'll give you a prime example. When I was in Cleveland covering the Republican National Convention, I was on the ground looking for activists to talk to about what their plans were to protest this convention, because obviously Donald Trump was in Cleveland, and we know the background, the story of Cleveland when it comes to police violence, right? So you think about Tamir Rice, you think about John Crawford, you think about Tanisha Anderson, an African-American woman who was killed by police officers in that city. A lot of people of color in particular, felt a bit insulted that Donald Trump, of all people, was going to be the headliner in a city that's dealt with so much racial strife. And I spoke with the Black Lives Matter chapter in Cleveland and asked them, were they going to show up at the RNC? And they said no. And they're focusing their attention on the incoming Cuyahoga County prosecutor, Mike O'Malley. And Mike O'Malley came in on a platform that he didn't believe that the Tamir Rice case was handled properly. And Tim McGinty, the outgoing prosecutor, was voted out primarily because of activism and because of Black Lives Matter activists, that chapter in particular working to get people to come out to vote against him. And another thing that the chapter did was they were able to convince Democratic ward leaders to not endorse any candidate during the Cuyahoga County a race. And so that shows very particular power that local activists are investing in local politics. And they said that they did not show up at the RNC because they felt it was more useful to focus on local politics, someone that can immediately control their day-to-day life, particularly with how police are punished and how police are treated if they abuse their power, than dealing with someone like Trump who has no interest in them at all. Now, if you're thinking about the Democratic side, I think that state legislators are equally important in this. Your state legislator, not even U.S. Congress, even though that was a critical issue, state legislators, because we live in a federalist society and a federalist political system, federal government does not have nearly the influence of as your state legislatures. So I spoke with a candidate running for House Rep in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, out of Philadelphia. His name is Chris Rabb. One of the things that he wants to propose when he gets into office is a bill that would require all Pennsylvania officers to have one license. And if that license is lost at one police department or in one municipality, they can't vote. They can't go to another municipality in that state to work if they have been accused and if they have been convicted of violating their power. So all these are state-specific issues. And I think that the caller is absolutely correct in that local elections are very important, and it's something that we are working at Fusion to do more reporting on to address those issues for our audience.
Running short on time, going to take two calls and let you respond.
Sure.
First, Michael is in Lancaster, California, Republican. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. The cops, I'm white, man. They pull me over. They search my truck. They give me hell. But you're talking the Democrat thing. What they're going to do is break this country. And you guys keep saying Bernie. Bernie was a socialist. That's the little sister to communism. I mean, it's not Social Security or social internet. It's one government power doling out to people. That's not freedom.
All right, Michael, got your point. And Bill is in Marietta, Georgia, a Democrat. Bill, good morning.
Good morning, Terrell. I'm from Detroit on the east side. Left there.
Hey, what's up, man?
How are you? Hey, listen, I'm glad to see that we got some young guys like yourself and Nina Turner, speaking on black issues other than Al and all the other names, Cornell, Tavis, whatever.
Al and Cornell, those guys are cool. But thank you, though. I appreciate it.
Yeah, they are. I give it to them. But, my problem with that, though, is I see a lot of millennials, they tend to forget just because they can go into clubs and party with white folks and jump in their nice cars and have decent jobs. There's a struggle out there with people who don't have anything. I was lucky enough to grow up on the east side where I didn't have I had regular troops during the riots instead of state national guards and state police. Folks in Georgia are cool, man. I have more problems with people coming from the north here to Georgia who have their little attitudes, whereas folks in Georgia are just down to earth, people to take you as you are.
Terrell Starr, give you a chance on those two calls.
Yeah, so I will I'll address the issue with Bernie Sanders. I think one of the disappointments in his campaign was that he was not able to articulate how his political revolution would benefit people who are not white. And so when you think about Bernie Sanders, I definitely feel he was sincere, and for all the criticism I've gotten for my tough reporting on him, I actually like Bernie Sanders. I actually felt like he had an opportunity to defeat former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The problem was that he did not utilize the talent of his black staff, and that's something that I feel was consistent with my reporting on the piece that got a lot of attention in regards to why he lost the black vote. He also did not have a rapport with black audiences, which I feel he could have developed, but I don't think he believed that it was necessary to treat black people as if they were pretty much the make or break of his campaign. He talked about economic inequality without having a racial analysis. He was very progressive on college education, tax reform, but he gave a very specific, very careful answer about reparations. And so, you know, we could talk about whether or not his socialist views would have been good for the country, but in either case, how he as a candidate would have trafficked as a president beyond his white support base. Even though a lot of young millennials voted for him of color, there weren't enough people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, black people, my parents, my grandparents, who saw themselves participating in this political revolution. When it comes down to Detroit and it comes down to a lot of the racial makeup of the city, I have to tell you, my grandmother grew up she came up from South Carolina during the 1940s, and she was working there at a time when she was a maid, and she told me about the tales of Detroit segregation, that if you crossed a certain area, then the white people and the white gangs will run you on the other, back over to the black side. And so, and we also know that in Detroit, for example, there are a lot of people, a lot of veterans who were returning from World War II and who wanted to buy homes, but because of racial discrimination, they weren't able to get home mortgages like their white peers, for example. And so when you think about Detroit and the current economic conditions that is under right now, people want to assign black people in the city with a pathology problem, as opposed to looking at the public policy that racially discriminated black people to one side of the city and white people to the other. And so one of the legacies of Detroit that Donald Trump failed to ignore during his economic speech in the city was the racial stratification of that community. And, but it's something that politicians continue to ignore, particularly on the Republican side. And even if it's not Donald Trump, one of the things that Republicans can do is acknowledge racism, historical racism in public policy. That would be a significant inroads, but they have yet to do it. So that's my commentary on Detroit. So I hope that helped to address his question, however,
And that's all the time we have left in this segment. Terrell Starr, you can check his workout at fusion.net. On Twitter, it's at Russian_Star. Thanks so much for the time this morning.
Hey, thank you very much.
And up next,